It's June 22nd. It's 3:30 in the morning. We're in a small town in northern Minnesota, Bemidji, Minnesota. A call is received at the Emergency Response Center that a house is on fire. The fire department responds. The place is fully involved. They manage finally to put the fire out, but the house is destroyed. They see a mattress in the living room. They pull back the mattress.
Deceased female victim.
And they discover human remains.
My name is Rob Frake. I'm a former special agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. I remember exactly where I was at. I had an appointment at the VA clinic in Bemidji, but I received a call. There's a fire at Hillcrest Manor. There's a body inside.
On the way.
Frake at the time, he had never been around many homicide investigations. He didn't understand what he was about to see and do.
Hillcrest Manor is a relatively large trailer park on the north side of city limits. I worked with Agent Girardi a fair amount.
What we got?
I got one inside, deceased female.
Okay.
Special Agent Paul Girardi had extensive experience in homicide investigations. This place is gone, gutted, destroyed. So it's a mess, an absolute mess.
The initial facts that I received were there was a woman that was found inside, deceased.
Frake is informed that the deceased person who lives in this place is a 35-year-old woman whose name is Melissa Norby.
Her hands were bound. You can infer a lot of things from that, but it's pretty obvious that somebody killed her and they tried to light the place on fire to cover up any evidence at the scene.
Our suspect had put a bed mattress over her. And mattresses are treated to be fire resistant, which likely helped preserve her body.
Question becomes, was she die because of the fire, or did she die by other means? We assume this is a concealment fire of a homicide, but we don't know yet. So rather than get lost in what it could be, let's try to determine what it is.
The fire marshal noted an indication of an accelerant because glass is pushed out several yards from the trailer. They did find the gas can in the bedroom.
There is a possibility that it was just a completely random act, but that's highly unlikely. So we're going to be looking for things like a boyfriend, a neighbor. There's going to be some sort of connection.
Who does Melissa Norby know who might want to make her look like this?
She lived with her 12-year-old son, who was not at home at the time of the fire.
So Melissa has a child. He's not there because he's staying with a cousin whose name is Tuesday Colby.
The BCA came to my home to speak with me and her son, and they had identified Melissa's body, and it was really hard. Everything was very overwhelming. We were basically like sisters. We were extremely close. She loved to laugh, she loved to smile. When Melissa was 10 years old, she confided in me that an older man had sexually assaulted her, and it really took a toll on her. Ever since that day, she was different. When Melissa was growing into a woman, there was always an older man around who would take advantage of her sexually. Watching her constantly hate herself is the worst, because you can't make it better.
So Melissa's had her issues with men over time, and she dates people of less than sterling character.
Do you know of anybody that would have wanted to see your cousin killed?
There were a few characters in Melissa's life that I thought might know more.
I'm not quite sure. I just know they're acquaintances.
She says that she has a friend who lives in Bemidji, whose name is Larry Erickson.
Larry had apparently been in some sort of romantic relationship with our decedent. Larry agreed to come in and speak with us.
Just got a few quick questions for you.
Larry had told investigators that he was home all evening watching movies. He denied any contact with Norby, denied knowing about the fire.
Were you guys romantically involved?
No. He denied any type of physical relationship with Melissa Norby, which was contrary to what we had learned earlier.
Erickson says she's been a good friend of his for some time. But we had a confrontation a couple months ago, and it's kind of damaged the relationship. Did you say confrontation? We like confrontations. So Frake is immediately interested.
He's in close proximity. He was up around the time that the fire started, and I thought Larry was looking really good as a suspect.
Well, Larry, can I take a look at your phone?
You don't need to do that. Why would you need to do that?
And Larry proceeded to start destroying his phone.
Hey!
Well, now you have my undivided attention. What is in that phone that speaks to the death of Melissa Norby? Let's find out. What can be learned from this phone? Larry becomes so angry that he becomes physically aggressive toward Frake.
You kidding me?
The interview wasn't going well.
He'd started to physically destroy his phone.
You are clearly involved in some sort of activity you don't want exposed.
All right, we're done.
So we're going to find out. This phone is going to be examined for content.
Hey, detective, come on in.
Frake checks back with a tech team. What's in the phone that's connected to this case? Well, it's not exactly connected to your case. What does that mean? He said photographs and video of him and his girlfriend in, shall we say, compromising positions. No. God. It's a personal porno collection? Is that what we're talking about? Yeah. Nothing of any value.
Larry ultimately alibied out and he wasn't involved.
Definitely, probably not our guy.
Okay. So now what sounded so promising, like it often does, collapses. While this is going on with Frake, crime scene investigators are still processing the scene. They examine the victim's car.
Find anything?
Bemidji investigators did find mail inside of Melissa Norby's car. that gave a name of a person, Rob Bacchus.
We don't know why that male is in the car. The reasonable conclusion is he's a friend, an associate. Investigators are questioning neighbors. Do you know a guy named Robert Bacchus? Oh, yeah, I know Robert. We'd like to talk to him. Well, you better hurry up.
We learned that several hours after Melissa Norby's house burns down, this individual leaves town on a bus.
What are you doing that for, Robert? Are you getting away from what you've done?
Any investigation, it's always time is of the essence, so we wanted to find that person right away. We called the Cass County deputies. We said, we need you to stop the bus for us.
If someone truly is believing they're going to escape somewhere by riding a commercial bus, haven't given a lot of thought to this. The police, with one phone call, turns the bus into a holding cell. They stop the bus, and they recover Mr. Bacchus.
And he talked about his relationship with the victim. He was upset that the victim was deceased, but hadn't had a consistent relationship with her for some time.
So, Mr. Bacchus, why are you suddenly on a bus going 4 or 5 hours away?
He said he was leaving town for some medical treatments.
He has a perfectly reasonable explanation for his behavior. He has to go to this doctor, and that's where he's going. And Holden confirms all of this. Bacchus is out. He's not involved in this.
Let's break.
In the meantime, the investigators hear from the medical examiner the official cause of Melissa Norby's death: asphyxia. She is dead as a result of ligature strangulation. Ligature is anything applied to the neck to cause sufficient pressure to stop the breathing of the victim. As far as trace DNA, if heat alone won't destroy it, fire will.
At this point, we're getting several hours into the investigation, and we don't even really have anybody that we're looking for. Every hour that goes by, this person can get further and further from the scene.
I don't know if it was over the radio or if it was a phone call at the time, but I still get tingles.
A female came up to the crime scene, made contact with officers on scene, and she told them that her 5-year-old daughter had spent the night with Melissa Norby.
She's 5 years old. Her name is Brittany. Oh, God. Now we've gone from adult to child, for God's sake. Where is this kid? They have no idea. None. It's now noonish, the day following the fire, and here comes this distraught woman whose name is Amanda.
Brittany! Where's my daughter?
She's demanding to speak to someone in charge.
My phone had rang. It was Tuesday, which is Missy's cousin on the other line. And she said, freaking out, please tell me it's not true. Tell me Melissa's house is not on fire. And I was like, Brittany's over there. What the hell are you talking about? I freaked out. I hopped in my vehicle and I made it over there in 5 minutes. All I really remember was me saying, please tell me that's not the house. I dropped to my knees. It was like, okay, that is her house. I told them my daughter is in that house. Brittany is in that house. I've known Melissa since elementary school. We were inseparable. We grew up. Her son was my nephew, and my kids were her niece and nephews. Melissa and I would always take the kids to the beach, slumber parties, movies, just a lot of fun family time. Brittany is the baby of the family. Melissa was Brittany's aunt, just like a second mom. Brittany would light up every time Missy would say, "Hey, do you want to come over and spend some time with me?"
She goes on to explain that it's common for Brittany to spend the night with Melissa Norby in this trailer.
Melissa had called me at like 9 o'clock at night. "Do you mind if I take Brittany?" She said her son is with Tuesday.
Well, where is Brittany now? The investigators do a thorough search of the remains of the house. They find no evidence of any other human remains. They do a thorough search of the area. No result. The child is not here.
When you get information that there's a child missing, that's what knocks the wind out of you.
Then it becomes even worse when they realize another possibility. Somebody took the child and killed the babysitter. The longer it takes to find them, the less likely it is that she'll be found alive. Every cop at that scene knows that.
She was close to the age of one of my children. You start thinking about how scared your kid would be. I think that mom instinct just kicks in no matter what.
So now it's all hands on deck. Nobody's going anywhere until we find this kid. And who's responsible for this? The focus must remain on associates of the adult victim.
So as I was going through Melissa's phone records, I was looking for anything that maybe stand out that wasn't a local number. Every hour that goes by, this person can get further from the scene. This child could be anywhere in the United States almost, including up in Canada.
Where have we not dug yet? It has to be somebody that knows about that child. It's somebody close. So how do we find somebody close? They dispatch agents to Tuesday Collerby's house, and they talk to the son.
Do you know if her mom was seeing anybody in particular?
They ask, is there anybody your mother has been recently seeing? And he says, yes. Well, who might that be?
And he's like, it was Chance.
Chance.
Chance?
Chance.
And I was like, Chance?
Well, they call him Chance, but that's not his real name. The kid says, I don't trust him.
Now, Chance isn't his real name. She called him Chance because, in her world, he was her last chance at love.
Toward the end there, she was secretive about guys because I didn't approve of half the guys she would be with, and her cousin really didn't care for them either.
Melissa continually made poor choices about love and about her own self-respect. And clearly in Melissa's case, it was a weakness.
We immediately thought, well, why is she not using his real name? Is he married? Like, why are we not seeing him in her social media? Because we're several hours into this investigation, And we have a pretty good handle on who she's talking to online. And he's nowhere to be found.
And then her son said, yeah, he has a food truck.
There's not a lot of food trucks around here. Well, let's make a call to the city clerk, figure this out.
I remember I was at the law enforcement center when the food truck information came back.
Okay, listen up, folks.
It was later in the evening. We were in a briefing. So I remember it was like, the hairs on your back of your neck stand up.
City clerk said, yeah, there's a new food truck in town. It's Jake's Eats, owned by Jacob Kent. It's one of those moments in your life that you'll never forget, where you were standing, what the room smelled, heard, and felt like, and it got quiet. Oh my God, Jacob Kent. Well, we all knew who Jacob Kent was. He was on probation for a sex-related offense. He was one of those guys that would be fully capable of kidnapping a girl.
He is the guy. He's the guy. Even if you haven't seen him yet, you just somehow know it. Investigators are looking at the record of 32-year-old Jacob Kent. He is currently on probation for possession of child pornography. He is friends with a woman who's now dead, who had a child in her possession, and now the child is missing.
It just seemed so obvious once his name came up. Of course, this would be him. Why are we looking for all these other suspects? Well, he should have been suspect number one.
It is always the case in investigations. You're going to get the wrong guy in your sights. But when you get the right one, that's when you can feel it in your bones.
I talked to Mom and Dad that evening. They were distraught.
My emotions were like everywhere because, well, I lost my sister and then my daughter was gone.
So early evening on June 22nd, we went to Jacob's residence. Pretty rural area, almost an off-grid type cabin. He'd left. We walked around the property.
Hey, Holden. Look.
There were some pretty obvious indicators this person might be it. There's a spot of dead grass next to other gas cans, which surely indicates that he got a gas can from right here at his house and used that to light the arson fire of Melissa Nordby's home. It's pretty damning evidence. However, no little girl.
The search for Brittany has continued as day becomes night.
At that point, everybody's out running leads. They're literally doing everything they can to figure out where this little girl might be, where Jacob Kent has been for the last 24 hours.
Hello.
The probation officer reaches Jacob by phone, and he tells him to report to police headquarters right now.
He did not make it to law enforcement center till midnight.
When he arrived, we noticed on his vehicle there was tall grass hanging underneath it. Looked like it had been driving through a field. Jacob Kent's feet and pants were also wet. Again, we'd got a ton of rain. Your feet and pants don't get wet if you're walking in a parking lot after rain, but they would get soaking wet if you were walking through a field. He was interviewed by Special Agent Paul Girardi and Special Agent Chad Museus. Agent Girardi and Agent Museus are interrogators. Jacob Kent screwed up by stepping into an interview room with Chad and Paul.
Where'd you just come from?
Well, I was fishing up north.
After the probation officer called Jacob Ken, we're able to get the cell phone location.
Okay, fishing where?
Clear Lake.
Clear Lake.
Based on where his cell phone pinged, he was in Big Fork, 30, 40 miles away from Clear Lake, where he said he was.
Yeah, did you hear about the fire?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do know that lady, actually.
And what's her name?
Melissa Norby.
Do you have any way to get a hold of her? Or?
No. I'll have her phone number here.
Ken is denying any type of relationship with Melissa.
Do you know the missing girl? Do you know her?
No.
Do you know her mom is Amanda?
No.
He denied knowing the little girl or ever having contact with the little girl.
Have you ever seen a little girl in person other than in a photo?
He would give short one-word answers. He's pushed away from the table. He's sitting back with his arms crossed. He had some nonverbal body language that he was uncomfortable.
His responses to our questions made us not very optimistic. I was worried we wouldn't have a good outcome.
Jacob is being Mr. Innocent. I don't know anything about anything. That's pretty normal for a guy with experience in the system. He'd make no admissions of any kind. It's been almost 24 hours since the murder. And Jacob says, if you don't arrest me, I'm going home. We're not going to arrest you, Jacob. Not yet, anyway.
He was allowed to leave about 4:30 that morning.
We took his phone, we took his clothes, and we took his Jeep. His dad came and picked him up. He left angry, and we left there feeling as though we had a double murder.
We sent surveillance units out because now we knew where he was at.
Our perpetrator has 12 or 14 hours to decide what to do with his child. The statistics are overwhelming. The longer this takes, the less likely the outcome will be good.
At that point, we just really thought he brought her somewhere rural, and that the next morning we were going to begin trying to locate where he put her.
I came home and I remember I laid down on the cot and my oldest had been waiting for me to come home. And all she did was reach out and took my hand. So I fell asleep holding her hand, and that just intensified that we have to get this kid back, whether she's alive or dead, because I would want to know.
Detectives don't like investigating the dead child.
Mm-mm.
Why? Why is it different?
I don't want to talk about that anymore. Too many memories creep back for me, my boy.
Myself and Senior Special Agent Don Newhouse got in his car to drive to Big Fork. We really needed more information on what he had done up in that area. We called Itasca County Sheriff's Office, our neighboring county.
It turns out his brother owns 40 acres of ground in Big Fork. What's up with that? What is drawing him to the 40 acres?
Jacob Ken could have put this little girl anywhere in northern Minnesota. Why would Jacob Ken put her on property that's deeded to somebody that shares his last name? And without missing a beat, Agent Newhouse explained that's controlled access. He's gonna go back. We had to do basically a map reconnaissance of the area. We had a specific gravel road in mind that led to the property, and when we pulled onto the gravel, I could see one set of tracks. At that point, we stopped, got out. And we continued to walk, following tracks, until we came to the top of a hill and we noticed a pickup camper parked along a wood line. We walked up and the doorknob was wrapped tight with electrical tape. I felt like one way or the other we were getting close.
They both know they're going to find that child one way or the other. The question is it the child or the child's remains?
I grabbed my shirt and kind of just pulled on the tape. And I flipped the door open. And there's a little girl sitting there on the bed. I'm basically in disbelief in what I'm seeing and trying to muster together the words.
Is it okay if I come in? Okay, you don't have to be scared, okay? We're the police. Okay, my name's Rob and this is Don. How old are you?
Probably 5 or something. My mommy's name is Amanda.
How do you feel watching that back?
Yeah, I've watched that video quite a few times. It's, you know, you get the same reaction every time. I don't know if a lot of folks realize really how hard some of these cases are.
There she is. Not the end of the story, but no longer necessary to search for Brittany because the police have her in their arms.
We got back to the car and I said, Don, take a picture and then send this out to the group.
I still get chills talking about it today, how many years afterwards. I can't almost physically describe that feeling.
I cried so hard in the car because I was so happy that she was alive and so, sorry.
I've had a great career. I've done a lot of really cool things. The outcome, finding our missing girl, definitely the best of my career. Definitely.
My phone rang, and he says, Amanda, we have your daughter. We have Brittany. And I said, please tell me she is alive. And he said, yes, she's alive. This picture actually is the reason I call them family. The Sheriff's Department, the BCA, everybody involved, they're family.
There's always moments in law enforcement that reinforce the idea why you took the oath in the first place. This is one of those days. Ken is wanted for murder and kidnapping. And now the whole state of Minnesota is looking for this creep.
We're setting up a perimeter near the camper where the girl was found because we know that's where he's going to go. And that's where they find him. On the road back to the camper.
They find him sleeping in his father's truck.
Place your hands behind your back.
Being the criminal genius that he is, he decides it's more important to sleep in a vehicle that's being looked at by every policeman in the state of Minnesota. They bring him in. Here he is.
Jake, has anything changed from when we talked last? Nothing's changed from last night.
What changed between 2 hours ago and now, right?
He asked what changed from the previous night, and I showed him the picture of Rob and Brittany alive. His eyes kind of rolled back.
Now, start over. What do you got to tell us?
Now is the time, Jake. I want an attorney. Okay.
Well, okay, Jacob, that'll still work. And you're being held without bond for first-degree murder, kidnapping of a minor child, and they lock him up. But what happened that Jacob decided to kill Melissa and burn her house down around her?
I remember the anger, the surprise, the frustration when we saw those text messages.
The technical service agent was going through the electronics, and he said, "Holy, you're not going to believe what I found."
Jacob Ken had basically demanded that Melissa get the little girl and bring her to the house the night that he decided to kill Melissa Norby. And Melissa Norby helped do that. And her actions directly resulted in this little girl's abduction.
Disturbing to the point of absolute shock. It is apparent from the texting that Melissa is part of the plot. Were she alive, she'd be in custody. But she's in a drawer at the morgue.
I could say that I would never have expected this from Melissa. She didn't always make the best choices, but I would never have thought she was capable of this. I'm really angry at her still.
I never knew what hate was until that day. It's like, how can somebody that you've known for 30 plus years do that to you?
Melissa Norby had the same problem that Jacob Ken has. A twisted sexual desire that overwhelmed her judgment, her kinship with other humans, her friendships. All of it meant nothing. These people are scum, both of them. As the case proceeds forward, Jacob decides to accept a plea bargain. Jacob stands up in court and he says, well, the plan was to kidnap the child and keep her as a sex toy for the two of us. Melissa also enjoys rough sex and edge games. In the alternative lifestyle, you bring someone to the edge of death to enhance their orgasm. He puts the belt around her neck in a manner of erotic asphyxia. Jacob says something went wrong, and she died during this experience. When she dies, he panics, and he throws gas everywhere, kidnaps the 5-year-old girl, ignites the place, and runs away. So at the end of the day, Jacob Ken gets 52 years in the Minnesota State Penitentiary. I would have handled that completely differently. If anybody needs a bullet, it's Jacob Ken.
I'll never believe she died of an accident. I think all along the plan was to kill her.
Melissa didn't know she wasn't part of the long-term plan. She was going to be dead and burned, and Jacob was going to take the little girl.
For Brittany, it's hard for her to talk about what happened, but she makes it through. She's still the rock that she was. The way I parent now is I baby them because I never know if it's going to be the last day I'll see them. Parenting is really difficult now. That's what makes it hard as a mom.
You do your best to separate what you're doing at work from your family life, and sometimes you just can't.
Is it okay if I come in?
The Mariana Trench is child's play compared to the depth of depravity in humans. Doesn't happen in Mother Nature, not in the animal kingdom. Humans are disappointing in so many ways. That's what makes them so dangerous.
Istanbul, October 2018. The city moved as it always had, with the rhythm of ancient empires layered into every stone, every shadowed alley, every echo from the Bosphorus that cut the city in two. A place where secrets were as common as the sea breeze, where intrigue was not history, but a daily currency. And into that charged air, one man stepped, unaware that this ordinary day would become the last chapter of his life. His name was Jamal Khashoggi, and within hours he would vanish from the living world into one of the most shocking political crimes of our time. Khashoggi wasn't just another man. He was a journalist, a voice sharp enough to pierce the walls of palaces, steady enough to withstand intimidation, and relentless enough to refuse silence in the face of power. He knew enemies lurked, but he believed he was careful, too careful to fall. After all, Istanbul was supposed to be safe ground, neutral territory, a crossroads of worlds where anything could be negotiated. That belief would be tested inside the walls of a consulate where curtains were drawn not to block sunlight, but to hide something darker. The day was October 2nd, a bright Tuesday, deceptively ordinary. Jamal Khashoggi walked toward the Saudi consulate, hand in hand with his fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. She waited outside, holding hope in her chest like a fragile glass, because he had promised he would only be a few minutes. He was there to collect documents, papers he needed to remarry, to build a new future, to close one chapter of his life and begin another. It was a mundane errand, yet beneath its surface currents of danger swirled. He had entered consulates before. He had met diplomats, questioned ministers, spoken in the halls of power. This was nothing new to him. But this time, the smiles inside concealed knives. This time, the door he walked through would not open again. Hatice waited, watched, counted the minutes, and then the hours. Her calls turned into pleas, her voice breaking into fear. The sun fell, and still he did not return. Something had happened inside those walls, something the world would soon discover with horror. But before we step into that suffocating room, we must understand who Jamal Khashoggi was, and why his name mattered enough for powerful men to plot his erasure. He was born in 1958 in Medina, the second holiest city of Islam. His family was not unknown. His uncle, Adnan Khashoggi, was a billionaire arms dealer who moved between the corridors of global power like a shadow with a gold pen. Jamal, however, chose a different path. He studied journalism in the United States, absorbing Western values of freedom of expression, and when he returned to Saudi Arabia, he carried with him a vision: to write, to question, to expose, to tell stories others wanted buried. He rose quickly, first as a correspondent covering Afghanistan in the 1980s. He watched the rise of the Mujahideen, witnessed battles where dust and blood mixed with ideology, saw Osama bin Laden in his early years, before the name would become synonymous with terror. Jamal was there, pen in hand, eyes wide, recording history before the world understood what it meant. He returned with scars invisible but permanent, the scars of knowledge. In Saudi Arabia, he became an editor, shaping newspapers, opening spaces for debate, but always pressing against invisible walls. He knew how to balance criticism with caution, how to suggest reform without crossing the line into treason. But the lines kept shifting, and every year they moved closer, tighter, more dangerous. His pen began to point directly at the crown, at the future king, Mohammed bin Salman, a young prince who wanted to reshape the kingdom in his image, and who did not forgive dissent. For years, Khashoggi walked a razor's edge. Sometimes he was praised for his insight, sometimes silenced, dismissed, or forced into exile. He lived between loyalty and betrayal, torn between love for his country and disgust at its suffocating control. Finally, in 2017, the pressure became unbearable. Friends were arrested, voices silenced, fear spread like smoke through the kingdom. Jamal left. He flew to the United States, to Washington, D.C., where he began writing columns for the Washington Post. His words no longer needed to pass censors. His voice grew louder. From exile, he criticized the crackdown on dissidents, the imprisonment of women activists, the brutal war in Yemen, the hollow promises of reform. His pen was fire, and from Riyadh, it looked like betrayal. To the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, Khashoggi was not just a critic. He was a threat, a reminder that power is not invincible when words can still move hearts and minds. And in the logic of tyrants, threats are erased. Back in Istanbul, Hatice waited by the consulate gates. Hours had passed. She knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. The Turkish authorities would soon learn that Jamal Khashoggi had not left the building alive. What happened inside was more than murder. It was premeditated, cold, clinical. A team of men had flown into Turkey just for this day. They were not diplomats. They were executioners. 15 men, split between operatives, security, and a forensic specialist whose expertise was dismemberment. They had come with bone saws, with plastic sheets, with orders whispered from the highest levels. Khashoggi had walked into a trap. Surveillance cameras captured his arrival, the smile he gave before stepping in. After that, nothing. No exit. The building became a tomb. Inside, they cornered him, argued briefly, then smothered his voice forever. He struggled, shouted, resisted, but he was outnumbered, silenced, murdered. His body was never returned. What remained of him was hidden, destroyed, vanished. To kill a man is one thing, to erase his body is another. A statement of power, a message written in blood. Defy us, and you will not only die, you will disappear. But they miscalculated. Istanbul is a city of watchers, of listeners, of whispers carried from cafe to cafe. The Turkish intelligence service had ears inside the consulate. They heard the struggle, the final cries, the chilling commands. They knew something unspeakable had happened, and Hatice, broken by fear, began knocking on every door, speaking to every official, every journalist, until the world could no longer look away. The story exploded, first as rumors, then as reports, and finally as undeniable fact. A Saudi journalist, murdered in his own consulate, by his own countrymen, on foreign soil. It was an assassination dressed as diplomacy, a crime that shattered illusions of safety and revealed just how far power would go to silence one voice. The world was shocked, but shock was not enough to stop the tide of denial, lies, and cover-ups that followed. For now, hold on to the image of that door. A man entering with hope, his fiancée waiting with trust, a building holding secrets darker than night. This is where Jamal Khashoggi's final story begins. And the walls of Istanbul, silent witnesses, would carry that story far beyond the Bosphorus, across oceans, into every capital where power is questioned and fear tries to rule. The hours after Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance were the beginning of a storm no one could contain. Hatice Cengiz stood outside the consulate gates, her face pale, her heartbeat uneven, her phone in hand as she dialed his number again and again. Each unanswered call was a knife of dread. People walked past her on the Istanbul street, unaware that history was being written beside them. She felt the minutes grow heavy, each one stretching into eternity. Something unthinkable was unfolding inside, and she could do nothing but wait. Turkish police responded quickly, but the building was sovereign Saudi soil. They could not simply walk in, could not push through those guarded doors. Diplomacy was a wall, and behind it, murder was being concealed. Hatis told them what had happened, that Jamal had gone inside, that he had not returned, that this was no accident. Her words carried urgency, trembling with conviction. The officers listened, hesitated, recorded. It was the beginning of an investigation that would shake the foundations of global politics. News traveled fast in Istanbul. Within hours, whispers moved through the intelligence services, the press, the embassies. The Saudi consulate claimed ignorance. They said Jamal had left, walked out freely, gone about his business. But there was no footage, no witness, no trace. The surveillance cameras captured his entrance but not his exit. It was as if he had walked into the building and dissolved into its walls. The lie was obvious, and in its obviousness, terrifying. Behind closed doors, Turkish intelligence already knew more than they admitted. They had been watching. They had recordings, audio captured from inside the consulate, a grim archive of the crime. In those recordings, Jamal's voice could be heard, tense, resistant, pleading. Then other voices, cold, commanding, mechanical, struggle, suffocation, silence, and the chilling buzz of a saw. These tapes were proof not only of murder, but of premeditation, cruelty, arrogance. Proof that this was no accident, no rogue act, but a carefully executed plan. As the Turkish authorities held their silence, gathering evidence, the Saudis built their wall of denial. They released statements. Khashoggi had left. They knew nothing. They insisted it was a misunderstanding. But their words collapsed under the weight of time. Each day, Jamal did not return. Each day, Hatis appeared in tears before cameras. The lie lost strength. The world began to watch. In Washington, the Washington Post raised its voice. Their colleague, their columnist, had vanished. They published his work again, highlighted his warnings, his words against tyranny. The image of Jamal Khashoggi, bespectacled, thoughtful, steady, filled screens across the globe. Who could silence a journalist inside a consulate and expect no one to ask questions? The answer was unfolding, ugly and undeniable. A state could. The Saudi government shifted its story like sand in a storm. First they said he left. Then, under pressure, they admitted a struggle had occurred. Then, days later, they spoke of a fistfight gone wrong. But every change betrayed them. Every word dug their hole deeper. The truth was too large to contain. Jamal had been murdered. His body had been destroyed. And the men who had flown into Istanbul on private jets, men tied directly to the Crown Prince's inner circle, were not criminals freelancing in shadows. They were agents of the state. Hatisha's grief became a beacon. She spoke to reporters with a voice heavy with sorrow but sharp with clarity. She told them how she had waited, how Jamal had promised a life together, how their wedding was days away. Her tears cut through politics, through statistics, through propaganda. She was not a politician, not a diplomat. She was a woman whose love had been stolen in the most brutal way, and the world listened. Meanwhile, Turkish investigators combed through the evidence with meticulous determination. They examined the consulate, traced the routes of Saudi vehicles, reviewed airport footage. They discovered the team of 15 operatives had arrived and left within hours of the killing. They identified the forensic doctor who had carried a bone saw. They named the generals, the bodyguards, the intelligence officers. One by one, the shadows took shape. It was not a rogue group. It was a state mission. But to accuse a state, especially one as powerful and wealthy as Saudi Arabia, required courage. Turkey weighed its options. President Erdogan, always a strategist, understood the value of information. He held the tapes, the evidence, the names, and he used them like weapons, releasing details slowly, deliberately, each revelation tightening the noose around Riyadh. He knew the world was watching, and he knew how to make them listen. When the audio recordings were leaked to international media, the reaction was explosive. The sound of Jamal's final moments, the fear in his voice, the brutality of his killers, the inhuman detachment of their leader, pierced the world like a blade. No one could pretend anymore. This was not rumor. This was murder. And the name of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, began to appear in headlines not as a reformer, not as a visionary, but as a man with blood on his hands. Western governments hesitated, caught between outrage and interests. Saudi Arabia was too important, too rich, too central to oil markets and arms deals. To condemn outright was to risk billions. But public opinion was unforgiving. Protesters filled streets. Journalists demanded justice. Lawmakers called for sanctions. The image of Jamal Khashoggi's last walk, into a building from which he never returned, became a symbol too powerful to erase. And yet, amidst the outrage, the machinery of denial continued to turn. Saudi Arabia arrested a handful of men, claimed they had acted independently, promised trials behind closed doors. They insisted the Crown Prince knew nothing, had ordered nothing, was shocked by it all. But few believed it. The killers were his men, his guards, his advisors. Could such an operation have occurred without his knowledge? The world asked. The world already knew the answer. Back in Washington, President Trump spoke cautiously, unwilling to sever ties with Riyadh. He said he believed the denials of the Crown Prince, even as his own intelligence agencies pointed to his guilt. It was a moment that revealed the fragile balance between morality and money, justice and geopolitics. A journalist had been murdered in cold blood, but the world still hesitated to confront the man believed responsible. For Hattis, the hesitation was unbearable. She cried out, not just for Jamal, but for truth. She reminded leaders that this was not about politics, but about humanity. Her grief became testimony. Her loss became evidence. Her love became a mirror, showing the world its own cowardice. In Istanbul, life went on. Boats crossed the Bosphorus. Prayers rose from minarets. The streets thrummed with commerce. But in the heart of the city, the consulate stood like a scar, a building forever marked by what it had hidden. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi was no longer just a crime. It was a message, a wound, a question. How far will power go to silence truth? And as days turned into weeks, the answer grew darker. The Saudis offered money, compensation, blood money dressed as diplomacy. They sought to close the file, to buy silence. But silence had already been broken. The recordings existed, the evidence existed. And Jamal's words, his articles, his final columns, remained alive, haunting the men who tried to bury him. What they did not understand was that killing a man can end his body, but not his voice. Jamal's voice had crossed oceans. His death amplified his words. And now, instead of silence, there was a storm. The Saudi government thought time would dull the edges of outrage, that with each passing week the world's attention would turn elsewhere. They underestimated the persistence of truth. In Istanbul, Turkish investigators continued to release details in measured doses, each revelation crafted like a blade, cutting through layers of denial. It was not just evidence, it was a narrative, and each fact carried the weight of a warning. We know what you did. The 15 men who arrived in Istanbul that morning did not come as tourists. They flew in on private jets, their schedules synchronized, their movements precise. Airport security cameras captured them walking through terminals with calm faces, some carrying briefcases, others traveling light. They checked into hotels, but none unpacked. They had not come to stay. They had come to kill. By evening, their mission was complete, and by nightfall, they were already gone. It was as if they had brushed through Istanbul like ghosts, except ghosts do not leave flight manifests, receipts, or surveillance tapes. Turkish intelligence traced every step. The vehicles that left the consulate were followed. The routes were mapped, the license plates recorded. One car was tracked to the residence of the Saudi consul general. It was there, investigators believed, that pieces of Jamal's body may have been hidden before being destroyed. The thought chilled, even hardened detectives. A man reduced to nothing, his very existence cut apart to deny his loved ones the closure of burial. The brutality was not random. It was method. The forensic specialist on the team, a man named Salah al-Tubaigi, was known for his expertise in dissection. He was recorded advising his colleagues to put on headphones as they worked, to block out the sound. It was a level of cruelty that turned the consulate, a place meant for diplomacy, into a slaughterhouse. And still, the Saudi government spoke of accidents, of fistfights, of rogue operatives. The world listened, stunned not only by the crime, but by the audacity of the lie. In Ankara, President Erdogan stepped forward with careful calculation. He addressed Parliament with a speech that was as much performance as it was revelation. He spoke of the sanctity of life, of the brutality of the act, of the betrayal of trust. He named no names, but he drew lines with precision, and all those lines led to one man, the Crown Prince. Erdogan held the world's gaze and let the silence between his words do the work. He had the tapes, the evidence, the proof, and he was not afraid to let the shadow of them hang over Riyadh like a sword. Internationally, the outrage grew louder. In Europe, parliaments debated sanctions. Germany announced it would halt arms sales to Saudi Arabia, a symbolic but sharp gesture. The European Union demanded accountability. In Canada, lawmakers spoke openly of the crime as state-sponsored. But the real test was in Washington, where billions of dollars in weapons contracts hung in the balance, where Saudi Arabia was not just a partner, but a pillar of U.S. strategy in the Middle East. The CIA conducted its own investigation. Their conclusion, delivered quietly but firmly, the murder had been ordered at the highest level. Mohammed bin Salman, the young crown prince who had charmed Silicon Valley and Western investors with his talk of reform, was implicated as the architect of the crime. It was a conclusion the White House did not want. President Trump dismissed it, speaking of jobs, contracts, money. He said the Crown Prince denied it very strongly. He suggested perhaps we would never know the truth, but the truth was already written in blood. The contrast was striking. On one side, cold evidence and grieving voices. On the other, political hesitation wrapped in calculations of profit. It revealed something deeper than one crime. It revealed the fragility of moral order in a world where power shields itself with wealth. And in that fragility, Jamal Khashoggi's name grew heavier, not lighter. He became more than a victim. He became a symbol. Hatice continued her fight with unshakable courage. She met with senators, testified before parliaments, gave interviews where her tears spoke as powerfully as her words. She told them of their love, of their plans, of how Jamal's life was not just politics, but human. She reminded leaders that he had been more than a columnist. He had been a man with dreams, with a future, stolen in an instant. Her presence transformed the story from an abstract scandal into a wound the world could feel. The consulate itself became a site of pilgrimage. Protesters gathered with candles, with placards bearing Jamal's face. Journalists came, notebooks in hand, cameras rolling, capturing every angle of the building where glass windows reflected only denial. The air was heavy with a question no one could silence. If this can happen here, to him, What safety exists for any voice that dares to speak? Inside Saudi Arabia, fear deepened. Dissidents, activists, writers who had once dared to push boundaries now shrank back into silence. Some deleted their accounts, others fled. The message was clear. If Jamal Khashoggi, with his international platform, with his connections, with his prestige, could be killed with impunity, then no one was safe. The walls of fear grew taller, stronger, suffocating, and yet, paradoxically, outside the kingdom, Jamal's voice was louder than ever. His final columns were read by millions. His warnings about authoritarianism, about the dangers of unchecked power, about the suffocation of free thought, seemed prophetic in the light of his death. His words glowed like embers in the dark, each sentence carrying the weight of sacrifice. He had written about freedom, and in death he embodied its cost. The Saudi regime launched a campaign to salvage its image. Billions were spent on lobbyists, public relations firms, conferences, and promises of reform. They spoke of accountability, of trials, of punishing those responsible. But the trials were secret, the verdicts opaque, the true masterminds untouched. They sacrificed pawns, while the king remained untouchable. It was justice as theater, a play performed for international audiences with no intention of truth behind the curtain. The world, however, had changed. Journalists who once praised the Crown Prince as a modernizer now described him as a tyrant. Investors who once flocked to his economic forums hesitated, withdrew, or faced public criticism for attending. The image of the young prince, once polished as a reformer, was now stained with blood. He had wanted to be seen as a visionary, but Jamal's murder had painted him as a villain. And still, amidst the outrage, there was silence in certain corridors of power. Oil flowed, weapons contracts were signed, meetings continued. Realpolitik had its own rhythm, indifferent to morality. The case of Jamal Khashoggi revealed not only the cruelty of one regime, but the complicity of a world willing to trade justice for convenience. Yet, in living rooms, in classrooms, in newsrooms, his story did not fade. It lingered, sharp and haunting. People whispered his name with sorrow, with anger, with reverence. He had been one man, armed only with words, and yet the machinery of a state had moved to silence him. That imbalance of power, that disproportionate fear of truth, exposed the vulnerability of regimes built on repression. It showed that even one voice can terrify the powerful, enough to kill. In Istanbul, the autumn leaves fell, covering the streets where Hatis once waited. Each leaf carried the memory of that day, the shadow of the door that closed behind him. And though the city moved on, the memory remained, inscribed in stone and wind. Jamal's story was not over. His body had been destroyed, but his absence was louder than presence. His silence screamed. His death was not the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The shock of Jamal Khashoggi's murder did not fade with time. Instead, it deepened, becoming a scar visible on the conscience of nations. Each revelation from Turkey acted like a drumbeat, pulling the world into a rhythm of horror and disbelief. The audio recordings were whispered about in diplomatic circles, described by those who had heard them as unbearable, searing, unforgettable. World leaders recoiled not only at the brutality of the act, but at its brazenness. Who would dare turn a consulate, a sanctuary of diplomacy, into a chamber of death? The answer was clear, and it reverberated in every capital. A crown prince who believed he could act without consequence. The narrative from Riyadh shifted like a shadow at dusk, stretching, twisting, always escaping the light. First denial, then partial confession, then excuses that strained the limits of plausibility. The phrase rogue operatives entered the lexicon, as if 15 men armed with a bone saw had casually decided to murder one of their country's most prominent journalists on foreign soil. The absurdity was transparent, but it was not meant to convince. It was meant to exhaust, to flood the world with versions until truth itself felt fragile. But Jamal's absence was undeniable. Hattie stood as living proof, her grief unwavering, her voice refusing silence. She appeared before cameras with trembling hands and determined eyes, reminding the world of the man who had been lost, of the love that had been stolen. Her presence was a counterweight to the machinery of denial, grounding the story in raw human pain. In her voice there was no politics, no calculation, only truth, spoken through tears. In Washington, the pressure mounted. Senators demanded answers. Journalists filled pages with outrage. Intelligence agencies whispered conclusions too heavy to ignore. The CIA's assessment was blunt. Mohammed bin Salman had ordered the killing. Behind closed doors, the evidence was overwhelming. Phone calls, intercepted messages, patterns of command, all threads woven into a tapestry of guilt. Yet the White House hesitated. President Trump, speaking in flat tones, insisted that America's partnership with Saudi Arabia was too valuable to jeopardize. He spoke of jobs, of oil, of contracts worth billions. Justice, in the halls of power, bent beneath the weight of money. The dissonance was glaring. On one hand, the image of Jamal Khashoggi, silenced, dismembered, disappeared. On the other, the smiles of diplomats shaking hands with the very men accused of authorizing his death. The hypocrisy was not hidden. It was broadcast. And in that exposure, a deeper wound opened. The realization that even in the face of such brutality, principles could be bought, bartered, buried. But the world outside the corridors of power was not so easily silenced. Protests erupted in cities across continents. In London, demonstrators gathered outside embassies, their chants echoing in the rain. In Berlin, placards bore Jamal's face, framed with the words, "Justice for Khashoggi." In New York, candles flickered in vigils, each flame a small act of defiance against the darkness of his killing. The story had transcended borders. Jamal was no longer just a Saudi journalist. He was a global symbol of what it meant to risk everything for truth. Meanwhile, inside Saudi Arabia, the atmosphere thickened with fear. Writers deleted their tweets. Activists vanished from public view. Conversations shifted into whispers. If Jamal, with his platform and connections, could be murdered, what chance did ordinary citizens have? The message was clear. Dissent would not be tolerated. Fear became policy. Silence became survival. And yet, cracks appeared. International businesses that once flocked to Riyadh's investment summits began to withdraw. High-profile executives canceled appearances, leaving empty seats where power brokers once sat. The Crown Prince's grand vision of transforming the kingdom into a hub of global commerce was tainted by the shadow of Khashoggi's death. Every handshake, every deal, every press release was haunted by the question, what price does one pay to stand beside a man accused of murder? Turkey pressed its advantage with calculated precision. President Erdogan, master of political theater, released details step by step, each new fact timed to maximum effect. He did not release the tapes in full, but he let enough slip to keep the world's attention captive. He spoke of premeditation, of deception, of betrayal of international law. He positioned himself as the guardian of truth, even as his own record with press freedom was stained. But in this case, he held the cards, and he played them with skill. The Saudis scrambled to contain the damage. They announced trials, secretive proceedings in Riyadh where selected operatives stood accused. But the process was opaque, hidden from international observers, wrapped in layers of control. Names surfaced, sentences were announced, but the masterminds remained untouched. Justice was reduced to theater. the guilty shielded by their proximity to power. It was an insult as much as an admission, a gesture meant not to resolve, but to obscure. Still, Jamal's voice refused to die. His final column, published posthumously, spoke of the need for freedom of expression in the Arab world, of the silenced voices yearning to speak. Reading those words in the shadow of his murder felt like hearing a ghost, his warning amplified by his absence, his vision sharpened by his sacrifice. The words spread like wildfire, translated, quoted, memorialized. They became his legacy, a reminder that while a body can be destroyed, ideas cannot. Hatis carried that legacy forward. She traveled the world, from parliaments to universities, from protests to conferences, speaking of Jamal, of love, of loss, of justice. Her courage turned grief into weapon, her pain into platform. Wherever she went, the story followed, refusing to fade, refusing to be buried. Her voice, trembling but unbroken, became the thread that kept Jamal's memory alive in the face of denial. In the corridors of power, silence and complicity lingered, but outside, the world had changed. Journalists began to see Jamal's fate as a mirror of their own vulnerability. Newsrooms discussed safety, freedom, responsibility. The question of who would be next hung in the air like smoke. Jamal had been killed to silence a voice, but instead, his death multiplied voices, amplified questions, spread defiance. The consulate in Istanbul, once a quiet building of bureaucracy, stood as a monument of shame. Its walls had heard the unthinkable. Its floors had carried the weight of a crime that could not be erased. People walked past and shuddered. Diplomats entered and avoided eye contact with protesters. It was no longer a place of diplomacy. It was a crime scene etched into the memory of a city. And somewhere in Riyadh, in the glittering palaces where power wrapped itself in opulence, a prince watched, calculating. He had silenced one man, but in doing so, he had invited the gaze of the world into his court. The whispers of reform, the image of modernity he had so carefully cultivated, lay shattered. He had wanted to appear as a leader of the future, but the blood of Jamal Khashoggi had painted him as a man of the past, ruthless, fearful, desperate. The storm had only begun. The storm did not pass. It grew, gathering momentum with each passing month. Jamal Khashoggi's name lingered in headlines, on the lips of protesters, in the chambers of parliaments. What had begun as a disappearance had become a wound carved deep into the fabric of international politics. And beneath the surface, deals were being struck, secrets whispered, alliances tested. In Riyadh, the palace lights burned late into the night. Advisors circled the crown prince, offering strategies, rehearsing statements, spinning narratives. He was young, ambitious, eager to cement himself as the new face of Saudi Arabia. But now the face reflected in the world's mirror was blood-stained. He had promised modernization, reform, progress. Instead, the shadow of a journalist's murder stretched across every promise he made. He pushed forward, announcing projects, unveiling futuristic cities in the desert, promising technology and openness. But at every forum, every stage, Jamal's ghost hovered. The questions returned, sharp and unavoidable. Where is the accountability? Where is the justice? Why is the man accused of ordering the crime still smiling beneath the chandeliers of power? Meanwhile, Turkey played its game with ruthless patience. Erdogan understood leverage. He had the tapes, the evidence, the world's curiosity. He released them in fragments, never enough to empty the barrel, always enough to keep the world leaning forward. Each detail, the chilling command, the sound of the saw, the casual chatter of killers, fell like stones into water, sending ripples across capitals. Erdogan knew that information was power, and he wielded it like a blade. Hatice Cengiz carried another kind of weapon, truth spoken from grief. She appeared before the United Nations, her voice breaking as she described the last day she saw Jamal. She spoke of love, of promises, of the life they were building. Her pain was not political theater. It was raw, unfiltered, undeniable. In her trembling hands, the world saw not just a widow but a witness who could not be silenced. Her testimony pierced through statistics and strategy, dragging leaders back to the human cost of their hesitation. In Washington, senators held hearings, demanding answers. Intelligence officials testified about intercepted calls, about patterns of control, about the certainty that this crime could not have happened without the prince's knowledge. Some senators emerged furious, their words searing. "There's no question in my mind he did it." Others, cautious, spoke of partnerships and strategic needs. The divide was clear. Morality on one side, money on the other. The CIA's report lay heavy in the air, pointing to Mohammed bin Salman with the weight of evidence. But the White House danced around it, unwilling to confront the reality. Contracts worth billions in arms sales, oil agreements, and regional alliances were too valuable, and so official statements drifted into ambiguity. We may never know all the facts, but the facts were already written in blood. Around the world, cracks widened in Saudi Arabia's image. Germany's freeze on arms sales stood as a moral stand, but it also revealed the reluctance of others. France hesitated, Britain balanced, America faltered. The question burned in the streets. If the world cannot demand justice for a journalist murdered in daylight, what hope exists for truth itself? Inside Saudi Arabia, silence grew heavier. Activists whispered in private, terrified. Some were arrested, others disappeared. Families lived with the knowledge that even leaving the country did not guarantee safety. Jamal's fate had proven that exile was no shield, that the kingdom's reach was long, merciless, and global. Fear was no longer confined to borders. It traveled with passports. And yet, paradoxically, the very act meant to erase Jamal had amplified him. His words, his warnings, his dreams for a freer Arab world now spread with greater force. His final columns were read in classrooms, quoted in debates, invoked in protests. The Saudis had tried to silence him, but in doing so they made his voice immortal. The image of the consulate became a global icon of betrayal. Tourists in Istanbul stopped to point, to photograph, to whisper. Journalists stood outside to film live reports, their microphones trembling in the cold wind. Protesters held vigils, their candles flickering against the walls that had witnessed the unthinkable. It was no longer just a building. It was a monument to hypocrisy, a reminder of what happens when power consumes morality. Erdogan pressed further. He allowed select world leaders to hear the tapes, forcing them to confront the horror directly. Some left pale, shaken, unable to describe what they had heard. The brutality was beyond imagination, and once heard, impossible to forget. Erdogan did not need to accuse openly. The recordings did the work. They etched guilt into the air, undeniable, suffocating. Meanwhile, in Riyadh, trials unfolded in secrecy. Names were withheld, proceedings hidden, verdicts announced with hollow formality. A few men were sentenced, scapegoats for a crime too large to contain. But the mastermind remained untouched, his power intact, his ambitions undeterred. Justice was a performance, staged for international consumption. Behind the curtain, nothing changed. The world watched, torn between outrage and resignation. Journalists continued their investigations, uncovering details of the killer's connections, their ties to the prince, their movements before and after the crime. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of denial. And yet, the man at the center of it all sat secure on his throne, untouchable. It was a paradox that left the world uneasy. The evidence was clear, the guilt undeniable, and still, justice impossible. But Jamal's story did not die with him. It lived in Hatish's tireless pursuit, in the vigils that refused to fade, in the voices of journalists who invoked his name as a shield, as a warning, as a promise. He became a symbol of what it meant to speak truth to power, and what price that truth could demand. In Istanbul, the seasons turned. Rain washed the streets where Hatice once waited. Snow fell on the rooftops, muffling the city's noise. The consulate stood silent, its windows reflecting only gray skies. But inside the silence was an echo, the memory of a man who walked in with hope and never returned. That echo could not be erased. It followed every diplomat, every official, every guard who passed through its gates, and beyond Istanbul, across oceans. His story spread like fire carried by wind. In cafes, in classrooms, in parliaments, his name was spoken. Jamal Khashoggi, journalist, critic, lover, symbol. A man whose death revealed the fragility of truth and the lengths to which power would go to extinguish it. The storm was not fading. It was transforming. What had begun as a crime scene in Istanbul was now a global reckoning, one that questioned not just one regime, but the very structure of power in a world where money too often outweighs morality. And the question lingered in every heart that listened. If Jamal Khashoggi could be silenced in this way, who among us is safe? The world had seen murders before, but few so brazen, few so public, few carried out beneath the flag of diplomacy. Jamal Khashoggi's death had crossed a line, and even as months passed, its shadow stretched longer, darker. Every new revelation seemed to echo louder than the last. What began as whispers in Istanbul was now a roar heard in every capital where freedom of the press, the balance of power, and the value of truth were debated. In Riyadh, the palace walls vibrated with unease. The crown prince, once hailed as a modernizer, now lived beneath a storm cloud of suspicion. His carefully curated image, the young leader who allowed women to drive, who spoke of innovation, who courted Silicon Valley, was shattered. In its place stood another image, ruthless, calculating, willing to crush dissent with knives and bone saws. And though his allies tried to polish the mask again, the cracks showed through. Behind closed doors, Western leaders faced a choice as stark as any in recent memory. Confront the prince and risk their golden deals, or look away and be complicit. Most chose the latter, wrapping cowardice in the language of strategic partnership. They shook hands while avoiding eye contact, signed contracts while avoiding questions, smiled for cameras while the blood of a journalist still stained the floor of a consulate. Their silence was deafening, but outside those gilded halls, outrage pulsed like a heartbeat. In Europe, Jamal's face appeared on banners carried through rainy streets. In Washington, his fiancée, Hatice, stood before senators, her grief transformed into fire, her words demanding justice. She refused to let the story fade. Her presence reminded them that this was not just geopolitics. It was love stolen, a life extinguished, a promise of marriage buried under layers of denial. Her testimony broke through calculation, leaving even hardened lawmakers shaken. Turkey, ever calculating, kept the world's attention hooked. Erdogan revealed just enough to maintain suspense, to keep Riyadh cornered. The audio tapes, horrifying in their detail, were whispered about in diplomatic corridors, replayed in nightmares of those who heard them. No one who listened could deny the brutality, the sounds of Jamal's last breaths, the orders of his killers, the casual cruelty of professionals who treated murder as procedure. It was all there, indelible. And Erdogan used that knowledge like a knife pressed to the kingdom's throat. Internationally, cracks in alliances widened. Germany's arms embargo stood firm. Canada spoke boldly of accountability. But in Washington, the split was glaring. Senators called for sanctions, while the president shielded the prince. It was a lesson in realpolitik, brutal and undeniable. Morality bends beneath money. And yet, even as governments hesitated, journalists refused to let the story die. Newsrooms across the globe dug deeper, tracing the money, the flights, the identities of the 15 men. Their investigations tore down every excuse, every lie, every desperate spin from Riyadh. Truth had its own resilience. Inside Saudi Arabia, silence thickened like smoke. Dissidents who once dared to speak now lived in shadows, their voices muted by fear. Families whispered at dinner tables, terrified of being overheard. Social media accounts vanished, deleted overnight. The message was clear. If Jamal, with his global platform, could be killed abroad, then no one was safe. Exile was no refuge. Borders were no shield. Fear was everywhere. But Jamal's story traveled faster than fear. His final column, published after his death, carried words that felt prophetic. He wrote of silenced voices, of the need for free expression in the Arab world, of the walls that crushed dreams. Reading it now was like hearing him speak from the grave, a voice that refused to be erased. His words became his revenge. They echoed in classrooms, in protests, in the halls of power, a ghost haunting those who had tried to destroy him. The Saudi trials were announced with fanfare, but they rang hollow. A handful of operatives were convicted, sentenced in secret. Their names were whispered, their fates unclear. The masterminds remained untouchable. It was justice as spectacle, staged for international audiences. Behind the curtain, nothing changed. The crown prince remained untarnished in his palace, untouchable behind layers of wealth and power. The performance fooled no one, but it was enough to allow certain governments to look away. Still, Jamal's memory lived, not just in grief, but in defiance. His fiancée refused silence. Journalists invoked his name. Protesters raised his image high. He became more than a man. He became a symbol of what it meant to resist tyranny. And symbols cannot be murdered. They spread, they grow, they inspire. In Istanbul, the consulate itself became a haunted place. Tourists stopped to stare, to take photos, to whisper the story. Journalists broadcast live from outside its gates. Activists held vigils, their candles flickering against the walls that had concealed so much horror. The building was no longer a mere office of diplomacy. It was a crime scene carved into the memory of the city. Every window, every brick seemed to bear witness. And across the world, in parliaments and palaces, leaders carried the burden of the question Jamal's death had forced. If one journalist could be silenced so brutally, what chance did truth have in a world ruled by power? The question hung like smoke, heavy, inescapable. It demanded an answer. Yet most turned away, unwilling to confront the mirror. For Hatis, there was no turning away. She carried Jamal's memory like a torch, lighting dark rooms where leaders preferred shadows. Her voice trembled but did not break. Her grief was fuel, her love a weapon. She reminded the world that Jamal had been more than a journalist. He had been a man, a partner, a dreamer. Her presence stripped away abstraction, forcing every listener to feel the cost of silence. The storm swirled relentless. Saudi Arabia spent billions to repair its image, to buy back legitimacy. Lobbyists filled corridors. Advertisements painted glossy pictures of reform. International conferences were staged with lights and applause. But the shadow of Jamal Khashoggi lingered over every banner, every handshake, every smile. No amount of money could erase the sound of that door closing behind him, the silence of his phone as Hatis waited outside. The crime had been meant to erase a voice. Instead, it created an echo that refused to fade. And in that echo lay the proof of something eternal. That truth, even strangled, even buried, even drowned in lies, will rise again. The story of Jamal Khashoggi did not end with his last breath inside the consulate. It began there, and from that moment, it spread outward like fire across dry fields, igniting debates, shaking alliances, staining reputations, and exposing the fragile bones of justice in a world dominated by power. What was supposed to be an erasure had become an eternal reminder. His absence screamed louder than his presence ever could. In Istanbul, seasons changed, but the memory remained heavy. The consulate stood like a mausoleum, its walls whispering of the crime they had concealed. People walking past lowered their voices, as if the building itself demanded respect for the dead. Each protest, each vigil, each flickering candle outside its gates carved the truth deeper into the city's memory. Jamal entered alive and never came out. And across the world, his name became a measure of courage, a question asked of every leader, every government, every institution that claimed to defend freedom. Where were you when a journalist was butchered for words? Did you speak? Did you act? Or did you look away? His death became a mirror, forcing nations to confront the emptiness of their slogans, the hypocrisy of their policies, the weakness of their moral backbone. The Saudi regime believed it could bury the truth with denials, trials, money, and silence. But the truth slipped through their fingers like sand. Each revelation from Turkey, each leak of intelligence, each new investigation from determined reporters tore open the wound again. The crime was too grotesque, too public, too symbolic to be forgotten. Hatice Cengiz became the unyielding heart of that memory. She traveled from capital to capital, carrying Jamal's story in her voice, her tears, her quiet strength. She was not a politician, not a diplomat, not a strategist. She was simply a woman who had loved, who had waited, who had lost. And in that simplicity lay her power. When she spoke, even the most powerful men could not look her in the eye without feeling the weight of shame. In Washington, senators invoked Jamal's name to demand accountability. In Europe, parliaments debated sanctions. In universities, students studied his columns as lessons in bravery. In newsrooms, journalists whispered his name as they pressed publish, knowing the risks but finding strength in his example. Jamal had become a symbol larger than life, and symbols cannot be killed. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince moved forward, unrepentant. He appeared at international summits, shaking hands, posing for photographs, smiling for cameras. His wealth was armor, his alliances shields, but no photograph could erase the shadow behind him, the whisper that followed him into every room, Khashoggi. No matter how loud the applause, it was always there, a silent accusation, a stain that could not be washed away. The Saudi state announced verdicts in its secret trials. A few men were sentenced, their identities blurred, their crimes reduced to formalities. It was theater, and the world knew it. The masterminds remained untouched, their power unshaken. Justice, once again, had been sacrificed on the altar of convenience. But justice is not only courts and verdicts. Sometimes justice is memory, and memory lived on. In Istanbul, the city of whispers, people spoke of Jamal as if he had become part of its soul. Taxi drivers told his story to passengers. Shopkeepers nodded toward the consulate with grim faces. Students carried his name into debates about freedom. He was not forgotten. He was woven into the fabric of the city, like a ghost that walked beside the Bosphorus. And beyond Istanbul, across continents, his story became a warning. It told journalists that their words were powerful enough to terrify kings. It told dictators that even murder cannot silence truth. It told the world that the cost of freedom is high, but the cost of silence is higher. Jamal's death was a tragedy, but it was also a testament. Proof that words matter, that courage has weight, that one man's pen could shake thrones. Hatice stood at his grave in absence, for his body was never returned. She wept for a man without a resting place, for a love without closure. And yet she also stood as proof that they had failed. They had tried to silence Jamal, but she spoke his name. They had tried to erase him, but she carried his memory. They had tried to kill his future, but she turned his death into legacy. The question now belonged to the world. Would it remember, or would it forget? Would it demand justice or accept silence? Would it honor Jamal Khashoggi as a man who dared to speak, or bury him beneath the weight of contracts and deals? The answer was not in palaces or parliaments. It was in the hearts of people, in the choices of journalists, in the voices of citizens who refused to be silent. The consulate doors in Istanbul had closed forever behind Jamal, but in closing they had opened something larger, a window into the truth of power, into the brutality of fear, into the fragility of justice. Through that window the world had looked, and what it saw could not be unseen, and so the story of Jamal Khashoggi does not end. It lingers, like a shadow at dusk, like a voice carried by wind, like a question that refuses silence. It is a story of love and loss, of courage and fear, of power and truth. It is a